4 disturbing true Thanksgivings, horror stories. Welcome to DTC, Dark Timeless Creep, where chilling, spine-tingling stories come to life. In today's video, we'll dive into 4 truly disturbing Thanksgiving horror stories. What should be a time of warmth and family togetherness turns into unforgettable nightmares. Prepare yourself, as these stories will make you rethink those annual traditions. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss out on more eerie tales in the future. Story: Staying with my sister for Thanksgiving. In 2023, I decided to spend Thanksgiving with my sister. She lived in a small apartment in Chicago, a city I had always loved. Her apartment was in a rapidly changing neighborhood where old buildings were being torn down to make way for trendy cafes, luxury shops, and towering high-rises. When I arrived, it was already dark. My sister's apartment, although small, was cozy. However, there was something off about it. The atmosphere felt heavy, dimly lit, and somewhat cold. The kitchen window looked out onto a dark alley, and I couldn't see anything beyond the shadows. Even though I tried not to dwell on this odd feeling, it lingered, following me as I moved around the apartment. My sister was thrilled to have me stay, but I sensed there was something unsettling about the place. Everything seemed fine during the day, but as night fell, a strange feeling began to settle in. It was as though the apartment transformed into something else when the darkness took over. One night, while we were sitting in the living room drinking tea, I heard strange footsteps in the hallway. It sounded as though someone was walking from room to room. I thought it might have been my sister, but when I got up to check, there was no one around. My sister had already gone to bed. Even more strange, her dog started growling, staring intently into the empty space ahead of it. I quickly returned to the living room, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But the odd feeling didn't leave me. The following night, I was preparing to sleep when I felt something strange in the room. My eyes were heavy, and just as I started to drift off, I realized I couldn't sleep. The room suddenly became oppressively quiet. I glanced out of the window, and the shadows of the trees outside stretched unnaturally long, almost as if someone was watching me from the darkness. Suddenly, I heard a knock on the door. I assumed it was my sister, but when I opened it, there was nothing there, just the cold, dark hallway. My heart raced, and I felt a sense of panic welling up. Then I heard a faint breathing sound beside me. I turned quickly, but saw no one. The chill in the air intensified, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Then, on another night, I woke up in the middle of the night. The room felt even more oppressive than before. The air was thick, and I couldn't breathe properly. I opened my eyes, and in the shadows of the room, I saw a figure standing beside the bed. It didn't move, just stood there staring at me. My heart pounded in my chest, and I couldn't tear my eyes away from the figure. It was as if the thing was filled with a cold, terrifying anger, and I could feel it radiating off of it. In that moment, I tried to breathe deeply, but the air felt suffocating. The shadow stayed still, its gaze fixed on me. The silence around me felt suffocating, like the world had frozen. For what seemed like an eternity, I couldn't move, unable to look away. And then, in an instant, the figure vanished. The room returned to normal, and I could breathe again, but the fear and unease stayed with me. The next morning, I decided not to tell my sister about the experience. I didn't want to scare her, but the strange sensations persisted. One afternoon, while I was standing in the kitchen preparing a meal, I saw the back door of the apartment slowly open by itself. I was certain my sister had locked it securely, but there it was, swinging open. I rushed outside to check, but found nothing unusual. Just the cold night air. Despite not being able to explain the strange occurrences, I could feel a presence in the apartment, something invisible but undeniably there. These weren't just coincidences, there was something else at play here. It was like a trace of an event long past, lingering in the walls and air, refusing to be erased. The nights grew harder to endure. I could never shake the feeling of being watched, and the atmosphere in the apartment became heavier as each day passed. I no longer felt safe when I was alone. The air always felt thick with tension, especially when night fell. Whatever presence was there seemed to grow stronger, feeding off the darkness. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, but the feeling never went away. And so my stay continued, filled with a sense of dread that I couldn't escape. The strange events never seemed to stop, each one adding to the terror that enveloped the apartment. The knocking, the footsteps, the shadowy figure beside my bed, all of it played over and over in my mind. The story ends unanswered, with more questions than resolutions. Was it simply a product of my fear and anxiety, or was there something truly supernatural at work in that apartment? The presence I felt never left, and the unsettling events continued. Even though I didn't have concrete answers, I knew that something beyond the ordinary was at play in that space. Whatever had happened there, it had left a mark, and the shadow of that presence continued to haunt the apartment, and perhaps even me. Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC Dark Timeless Creeps and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Story 2. He Strange Footsteps on Thanksgiving Night. On Thanksgiving night in 2023, my friends and I set off on a camping trip to a remote forest far away from the hustle and bustle of the city. We were looking forward to enjoying the peacefulness of nature with plenty of food, drinks, and good spirits. The campsite was nestled between towering ancient trees, with autumn flowers adding splashes of orange and gold to the surroundings. As dusk settled, we gathered around the fire, savoring the classic Thanksgiving dishes, roasted turkey, sweet potatoes, and pumpkin pie, all while basking in the warmth of the flickering flames. At first, everything felt cozy, almost magical, as we shared stories and laughter, the comforting aroma of food mixing with the crisp autumn air. But soon, a strange unease began to creep in. The warmth of the fire seemed to be swallowed up by the vastness of the forest, and despite the cold night air, the hairs on the back of my neck started to stand up. There was something off about the night, something unspoken lurking just beyond the flickering light of our campfire. We laughed it off at first, attributing it to the isolation of the forest, but then we began to hear it, footsteps. Soft, measured, and almost too deliberate to be the sound of wildlife. The noise was faint at first, so we dismissed it, assuming it was just a deer or some other animal making its way through the underbrush. But the steps didn't stop. They moved around us as if something or someone was circling the camp. Each step was followed by another and another in a rhythmic pattern. My friends and I froze. We exchanged glances, the laughter dying in our throats. There was no mistaking it now. These were human steps, or something that mimicked them perfectly. I grabbed a flashlight, my hand shaking as I scanned the surrounding trees and shadows. Nothing. The footsteps continued, drawing nearer with every passing second. Suddenly the wind picked up, howling through the trees, and the firelight wavered, casting eerie, distorted shadows on the ground. We felt the temperature drop sharply, and a sense of dread washed over us. One by one, my friends grew quiet, their eyes darting nervously around the camp. I noticed a shadow darting between the trees at the edge of our camp, too quick for me to identify. My heart raced as I strained my eyes, but whatever it was had vanished, swallowed up by the thick darkness of the forest. We gathered our courage and decided to venture outside the camp, flashlights in hand. The footsteps followed us, getting louder, closer. Every time we flashed the light toward the sound, there was nothing there, only empty trees and blackness. We tried to follow the sound, but it led us deeper into the woods where the air felt heavier, oppressive. There was a sense of being watched, a constant suffocating feeling that never let up. The more we searched, the less certain we became of what we were actually hearing. At one point, my friend Sarah pointed toward the ground. There in the dirt were large footprints, but these were unlike any animal tracks we'd ever seen. The prints were too large, too deep, and the shape didn't fit any known creature. They were human in appearance, but impossibly large, as though a giant had wandered through the forest. We stood frozen, staring at the footprints, when a bone-chilling laugh echoed from the darkness. It was deep, guttural, and seemed to come from all around us. We turned, but there was no one there. Panic set in, and we ran back to the camp. But the footsteps didn't stop. They followed us, growing louder, more frantic. The air seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. I could feel something pressing down on my chest, as though the forest itself was alive, hungry, and watching us. By now it was clear that whatever was out there wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was something far worse. Something that had no place in this world. We huddled together by the fire, too terrified to sleep, listening to the footsteps grow closer and closer. The fire flickered once more, its flames dancing wildly, casting grotesque shadows across our faces. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. The forest fell silent, but when we looked around the camp, we saw something that made our blood run cold. In the center of our circle, right by the fire, was a figure, a silhouette. Tall, gaunt, and vaguely humanoid in shape, but not quite right. Its features were obscured by the dark, but we could feel its eyes, cold, unblinking, locking onto us. It stood still, unmoving, as if it had been watching us for hours. With a scream, we scrambled to our feet, grabbing what we could, running blindly into the forest, leaving everything behind. The only thing that mattered was getting away. The footsteps followed us, echoing in our ears, but we didn't dare look back. We ran until we couldn't hear the sound anymore, until the only thing we could hear was the frantic beating of our hearts. When the first light of dawn broke, we finally stopped. We were far from the camp now, deep in the forest, breathing heavily. The tension in the air had lifted, but the fear still clung to us like a second skin. We didn't speak. There were no words. We just stood there, staring at the dark woods, unsure if the thing that had followed us was truly gone. When we returned to the campsite, everything seemed eerily calm. The fire was cold, the tents untouched, as if nothing had ever happened. But the footprints were still there, fading slowly into the dirt. No sign of the figure, no trace of the footsteps that had stalked us all night. It was as if the forest had swallowed up everything, leaving no evidence behind. We packed up as quickly as we could, not daring to look back. No one spoke of it again. The memory of that night would stay with us, haunting our dreams and waking moments. We never returned to that forest. But sometimes when the wind howls through the trees at night, I can still hear the footsteps, just on the edge of hearing, reminding me that some things in the woods are better left undisturbed. Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC Dark Timeless Creeps and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Story: The Old House on Thanksgiving Night. The old house I stayed in during this Thanksgiving holiday was unlike any place I had ever visited. Built in the previous century, the house had wooden walls, aged tile roofing, and a neglected garden left to grow wild in the darkness. Every time I stepped inside, it felt as though I was stepping back in time to an era filled with memories and secrets that still seemed to linger in the corners. However, tonight, an eerie feeling hung in the air, something that made me uneasy, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. From the moment I crossed the threshold, a cold breeze swept through the house, sending a shiver down my spine. Unlike the other times I'd visited, the air in the house today felt heavier, like there was something hidden in the atmosphere. At that moment, my sister was busy preparing everything for the Thanksgiving dinner, and while the warmth of the house seemed to bring comfort, there was an unsettling undercurrent beneath it all. As I walked into the living room, my eyes were drawn to the old wall clock, a cherished family heirloom that had been in the house for generations. Each time I visited, the rhythmic ticking of the clock was a comforting presence, but tonight the clock was completely silent. The hands were frozen at midnight, as if time had come to a standstill. No one had touched it, and yet it remained motionless. I stepped closer, inspecting the clock, but it still didn't tick. A chill ran through me, and my mind raced. Why had it stopped? Why now? I tried to brush it off, but the weight of the silence in the room pressed on me. It felt as though the clock's stillness reflected something deeper, something I couldn't fully grasp. Nightfall came, and we sat together in the living room, sipping tea and chatting. But the silence of the house grew more oppressive, as if the walls themselves were listening. I glanced out of the window, but the sky was pitch black, the trees outside swaying in the wind. The quiet was unnerving, and then from the hallway I heard it, a faint sound. Footsteps. At first I assumed it was my sister moving around, but when I stood and checked, there was no one there. My sister was already in bed, fast asleep, and the house was eerily still. I looked again at the hallway. The air felt thicker, as though something or someone was lurking just out of sight. The dog too lay silently on the couch, but I noticed its eyes were wide, staring intently at the empty hallway. Later that night, I woke up suddenly from a deep sleep. My heart was racing, my breath shallow. Something wasn't right. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, and that's when I saw it. A shadow. A dark figure standing at the foot of my bed. The shape was still, unmoving, just watching me. I froze, unable to move or speak, my body gripped by fear. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure didn't change its position. It just stood there, as if it were waiting for something. And in that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of anger and malice radiating from it, though it was silent. I couldn't look away, despite the terror that gripped me. The cold feeling in the room intensified, and I felt as though I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape from. The next morning, I tried to shake off the events of the night. Perhaps it was just a dream, I thought. But the unsettling feeling remained. I pushed it aside and helped my sister with the preparations for dinner, trying to focus on something normal. Yet, deep inside, I knew something wasn't right. Then, while I was standing in the kitchen, something strange happened. The back door, which I was certain had been locked, suddenly swung open. The air turned colder, and I was taken aback. I rushed to the door, but no one was there. The space outside was empty, and there was no sign of anyone who could have opened it. The sense of something sinister, something hidden, crept back over me. How could this happen? How had the door opened by itself? That evening, we gathered again, sitting in the living room. The warmth of the house couldn't drive away the cold that seemed to permeate everything. The unsettling presence, the strange occurrences, all made the night feel even more oppressive. The house, which had always felt like a home, now felt like a place where shadows and forgotten memories haunted every corner. And then a new sound, a faint creaking from above. The stairs. The heavy sound of footsteps echoed down the hall, But when I looked up, there was no one there. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I glanced once more at the clock on the wall. It remained silent, unmoving. Time had stopped, or so it felt. I was certain that something or someone was watching me. I could no longer deny it. The house was not what it seemed. It was as if a force beyond my understanding had taken hold of it. The silence, the eerie noises, the figure in the night, all of it pointed to something darker, something that had existed long before I arrived. My mind raced with questions, but the answers eluded me. Despite my efforts to ignore it, the feeling of being watched persisted. The house, with its old walls and hidden corners, seemed to be alive, watching, waiting. And I too felt like I was waiting for something I didn't understand. I never fully understood what was happening in that house. Every strange occurrence, every unsettling sensation seemed to be part of something bigger, something far beyond my comprehension. The clock that stopped ticking, the footsteps in the hall, the shadow that watched me, it all blended into one continuous nightmare that left me shaken. And yet, when I left the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone still lingered there. The house was silent once more, but the memory of that night and the haunting presence that filled the air stayed with me. The house and its secrets were left behind, but I knew deep down that I would never forget the feeling of being watched in that old, eerie home. Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC, Dark Timeless Creeps, and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Story: Thanksgiving Night Alone. This Thanksgiving, I decided to stay alone in my small house while my family was busy with their own plans. Everyone had something going on, but I thought it would be a great opportunity to enjoy some quiet time by myself, unwind, and savor the holiday in solitude. I prepared a simple but comforting meal: a small roast turkey, mashed potatoes, and a few side dishes. Although there was no one to share the meal with, I found comfort in the familiar flavors. After finishing dinner, I sat by the fireplace, reading a book and listening to soft holiday music. The house was filled with the warm glow of decorative lights, and the scent of cinnamon and cloves lingered in the air, creating a cozy, festive atmosphere. Despite being alone, I felt a sense of peace, convinced that Thanksgiving could still feel festive even without the usual family gathering. However, as the clock struck 11 p.m., something started to change. The warmth in the house seemed to slowly fade away, replaced by an eerie chill. A cold draft sneaked through the windows, even though they were supposed to be shut tight. I stood up to close the windows, but the sensation didn't go away. It felt as if the atmosphere had shifted, becoming heavier, darker. I returned to my seat, trying to shake off the unease, but then I heard it, a soft sound coming from the living room. At first, I thought it was just something falling, maybe a book or a dish, but when I checked, nothing had fallen. The room was as still as ever, bathed in the soft glow of the lamps. I told myself it was nothing, maybe just the house settling or a draft, but then the noise came again. This time it was more deliberate, like something was moving around. A knock on the door. The sound was soft at first, like the tap of fingers against wood. I stood up, walked over to the window to look outside, but there was no one there, just the empty street, bathed in the pale glow of the streetlights. Confused, I turned back to the door, only for the knock to sound again, louder this time, as if someone was impatiently waiting outside. I hesitated. Who could be knocking at this hour? My mind raced, but when I opened the door, there was no one. The night air was cold, and I could feel a strange pressure in my chest. The door had been locked, and yet it felt like something or someone had just passed through. The only thing that followed was the unsettling quiet, broken only by the occasional rustling of wind. I closed the door quickly, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination. But that's when it hit me, an overwhelming sense of something not quite right in the house. As I turned back toward the living room, I noticed the lights flickering slightly, as if they were being affected by some unseen force. I froze, my heart racing. Something was wrong, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to find out what. It was then that I heard the footsteps. They were light, almost imperceptible, but they grew louder as they approached. Footsteps coming from the hallway, like someone walking softly but deliberately, moving from room to room. My breath caught in my throat, and I quickly scanned the house. There was no one there, only shadows and the faint creak of the old floorboards under the weight of the invisible presence. I stood motionless, trying to steady my breathing, but then my dog, who had been lying quietly on the couch, started barking furiously, her eyes locked on the hallway. Her bark grew frantic, high-pitched, as if warning me of something dangerous. It was the kind of barking I had never heard before, desperate and full of fear. My stomach sank, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. There was no mistaking it now. Something was in the house. I grabbed my phone and tried calling my family, but no one picked up. Panic began to set in, and the air in the room felt heavy, thick with a presence that I couldn't see but could feel. Suddenly I heard a sound, like a door opening then closing, coming from the guest room. My pulse raced as I stepped cautiously into the hallway, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow, looking for any sign of movement. And then I saw it. A shadow, barely perceptible at first, but unmistakable as it loomed at the end of the hall. It was human-shaped, but unnervingly still, as if it were waiting for me to acknowledge it. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It was as though time had stopped. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I could feel its presence, cold, silent, and watching. For what felt like an eternity, I stood frozen, staring at the dark figure, until suddenly, almost as if it were summoned by my fear, it stepped forward. I could see the faint outline of its form, tall, thin, with a strange distortion around its edges, like a black mist bleeding into the shadows. Its face was obscured, but the energy it radiated was one of pure malice. It wasn't here for anything good. I stumbled back in horror, my heart pounding in my chest, but then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the figure vanished, gone, as if it had never been there. The room fell completely silent, save for the thumping of my heart. Still trembling, I tried to call my family again. No one answered. The house seemed to be playing tricks on me, but I knew deep down that something sinister was lurking in the corners of my mind, in the dark corners of the house. Then, as if to confirm my fears, the door to my bedroom creaked open by itself. I rushed to it, my heart now in my throat, but when I looked inside, it was empty. Still, the eerie sensation lingered, heavier than ever. My phone buzzed, but when I checked it, it was just a notification from a news app. Ghost sightings rise during holidays. The words burned into my mind as I stared at the screen. It was almost as if someone or something was taunting me. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned off all the lights in the house, grabbed my coat, and ran outside. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but it felt like a relief. For the first time in hours, I could breathe again, my chest no longer tight with fear. I looked back at the house, but I didn't dare go back inside. The presence, whatever it was, still felt like it was waiting for me. I stood there in the quiet of the night, under the flickering streetlights, feeling the weight of what had happened. I didn't know what the figure in my house was or why it had come, but I knew I wasn't going back inside to find out. As the darkness deepens and the stories grow more unsettling, we venture deeper into the unknown together. Each chilling tale brings us closer to the eerie truths lurking just beyond the veil of reality. The terror doesn't stop here, it only gets worse. Subscribe to DTC Dark Timeless Creeps now and stay on the edge of your seat. You won't want to miss what's lurking in the shadows next. Hit that notification bell and prepare for the next terrifying chapter. Remember, in the world of DTC, the creeps are always waiting, and they never rest. iMoon